Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha and I'm a professional Vedic sidereal astrologer. So I have a really important topic that I want to discuss today. And I want to essentially discuss this idea of staying even kiltered through whatever you're experiencing in life because the tide is always going to shift. All right, and this is really important in connection to astrology. It's actually the most important thing in connection to astrology. And I've been kind of trying to come up with the right verbiage and the right way to express this because, you know, astrology is a science of timing. Okay, so we can see when someone is going to go through rougher time periods. We're going to see when someone is going to astrologically struggle a little bit more. We can also see when someone is going to be in this like amazing dasha or an amazing Jupiter transit or, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on, right? And this is such an important concept because the tide is always shifting in life, okay? And let me explain. So, it's important to not get too in our ego, too confident, too, smug about things when things are going really well. And it's also important to not get overly pessimistic or negative when things aren't going well because the tide is always shifting, right? Whatever is up has to come down, whatever is down has to come up. Things are always shifting and moving in cycles and seasons, okay? So, for example, let's say someone is in a quote unquote winning time period in astrology. They have amazing transits, they're in an amazing dasha sequence, and they're having this really high, experience for like 2 to 3 years. This is just an example. And then all of a sudden, they go through Sati Sati, hit their Saturn return, or, hit a really rough dasha period, and then that sort of high starts coming down and is, coming more even kiltered, right? That is what I'm talking about, okay? And vice versa, right? Someone can be going through Sati Sati, hit by Saturn, hit by, a Saturn Rahu dasha, and really hit by all this really, heavy, dense energy in transit. And then it can pass, and in a year, in 2 years, they're going through some amazing transits. The tide is shifting, right? Are you getting what I'm, saying in this video, right? Is that everything is always shifting, everything is always moving, everything is always cyclical, right? So it's really important that when we're like going through these amazing time periods and we're experiencing these amazing things, like, yes, enjoy it and embody it and, be super grateful and enjoy those times and be happy, but also know that like things always shift as well too. So you can't get overly cocky, you can't get overly egoic, you can't get overly self-assured that like, oh, everything is going so well for me, it's always going to go so well, and these people don't have this, things like that, right? Or the opposite end of the spectrum, where when you feel like you don't have enough or you're going through tougher transits, not being so negative or pessimistic or nihilistic in those time periods either, because the tide is always gonna shift, right? One of my favorite examples of just this like huge astrological glow up is Trisha Paytas, who really struggled so much of her life. She was always crying on the internet. She was always making these videos about how sad she was all the time. And, it was these really intense videos about her emotional state and how unstable she was and unhappy and all these things, right? And then she just had to wait a couple years until she entered the right dasha sequence, which I've made a video on, which you guys should go watch as well too, where I talk about the glow up of Trisha Paytas and how it's connected to Vedic astrology. And she just had to wait a couple years, and then she goes through this amazing dasha time period, and she has children, and she gets married, right? And the thing is like everything is cyclical. Everything is shifting, right? That's why we can't overly attach to one thing. That's why we can't overly attach to, both the negative emotions and the positive emotions, right? Because something can feel so good and so right, and we can be in like a winning season in astrology, and then we can also get really hit by tough transits and a dasha sequence 2 to 3 years later. So it's important to know that like things are always shifting. It's always going to move, right? Like whether it's good, whether it's bad, you don't want to get too high, you don't want to get too low. It's important to try to stay kind of like balanced and grounded through the ups and the downs that life throws at us, right? And, I'm someone who has been hit by really intense transits and dasha sequences most of my life, which I actually think is why I am a Vedic astrologer, is because I've gone through such intense transits, right? Like I've been going through a Rahu dasha since I was 13 years old. I started my Rahu dasha. The second I started going through a Rahu dasha, my whole life changed for the worse. Like best believe when you come into a Rahu dasha, your whole life is going to change in some drastic regard, right? So I was in, my life before that, which I was only 13 years old, but I was going through life, la la la, life is good, everything is good. I hit a Rahu dasha and oh my goodness. I get hit left and right with just intense experience after intense experience after intense experience, right? And it was just so Rahuvian in that way, where I was only 14 years old, but then I started struggling with a lot of Rahu things, okay? I was only 17, 18 when I was going through like a Rahu Saturn dasha, which is one of the worst dashas that I've ever personally experienced. And other Vedic astrologers I've, talked to about their dasha sequences, I've heard that Rahu dasha has been their worst dasha sequences that they've ever gone through. And I was only like 17 years old and I was going through one of the worst dasha periods of my entire life. I was like sick all the time. I was really unwell. Like it was really, really bad. And I was so young at the time, but I was going through a really bad dasha sequence, and that just happened to line up with that age, right? And then I went through Sati Sati right after all of this. So I also went through Sati Sati during my Rahu dasha, after this intense dasha sequence. So I can speak from personal experience of like what it's like to be hit by intense astrological transits and dashas, like one after the other, and then finally getting to a place where you enter like a really positive, time period or like dasha sequence or transit time, and you're kind of like, whoa, this is different, but also, I don't want to get too high because you don't want to, kind of get too out of balance in life, right? So for me, when I was so used to like intense dasha sequences, intense Sati Sati, and then I had this really just like chill, like blissful 3-year period of like really good dasha energy, good transits, I was almost like, what's happening? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where's the craziness? Like, where's the chaos? Because you get used to it, right? So that's what I'm talking about, is everything is always shifting and changing. Like, for example, when I went through my Jupiter return, which everyone goes through their Jupiter return around the same age, I was so lucky that year and I was just like so blessed and I was like so happy, and I actually was lucky enough to get an astrologer who told me about my Jupiter return, and she was like, you're about to go through your Jupiter return and you're gonna be blessed. You should ask people for anything you want to ask them for because you're gonna receive it. She was like, get ready. And I had a really amazing Jupiter return. I was just like fun, free, Jupiter, woo, having the time of my life, right? And that was before Sati Sati hit, which don't even want to get too into Sati Sati in this video, but that is life. Like, we're high and then we're low, and we experience a lot of intense things astrologically. And then we can also go through a time period where it's like kind of chill and it's just kind of good and not much is going on astrologically, right? So that's why it's important through like tough transits to try to stay grounded and know that it's always going to shift and it's always going to change. And it's also important when you're going through really positive transits to also stay even kiltered, because you don't want to get overly cocky about like, oh my God, everything's happening for me. Everything's working out for me. Nothing bad is ever going to happen again, right? It's like you really want to try to stay grounded through all of the different experiences, right? And when I was going through a Rahu Dasha, when I was going through a Rahu Saturn Dasha, when I was going through Sati Sati, most of those time periods I felt insane because I didn't have the context of Vedic astrology to explain everything that was happening, right? And I truly think like that's what pushed me into becoming a Vedic astrologer, was that God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, um, chose to give me like all the intense astrology at a young age. It was like, here you go, like you're gonna go through all of the worst dasha sequences you can go through. And then you're gonna be hit with Sati Sati. It was like that for me, but it just had to be that way for me to understand like different dasha sequences and transits. So it was really important for it to happen that way, right? Even though, I could have used a little bit easier of a Rahu Dasha, but it's fine, it's fine. All in divine timing. But, that's the way that the universe works. That's the way that astrology works, is everything is cyclical, everything is shifting, right? So again, I love using like Trisha Paytas as an example, because her whole life changed when she went into a really positive, benefic Jupiter-Venus dasha, right? And if she didn't hold out and wait until that positive time period that was going to open up, she would have missed out on all the amazing blessings that, came to her in that dasha, right? And I think it's also easy in life to feel like when we're experiencing something, when we're going through something, that it's never going to change, but it's not true. It's always going to change. Like the only thing that is a constant is change, right? Like nothing is ever going to stay exactly the same. So when you are going through rough time periods in life and astrology, you have to know that it's always going to shift, right? And to me, that is what is so beautiful about astrology, is like to be able to tell someone like, hey, I know that you've been experiencing this and this, but it's going to change in 2 to 3 years. Give it 2 years, give it 3 years. Everything is going to change and get better. Like, do you know how amazing that is to hear when you are going through tough experiences, to know that it is going to change, and also to know that, you just have to kind of wait for the cycles and seasons to unravel a little bit, right? And again, it's also like when you're going through such amazing time periods in life, it's also important to know like, hey, it might be good right now, but save some money because you might be going through a tough, financial transit in a year, or you might be having to save up for 2 years, or, maybe your relationship is going to be really tested in like a year to 2 years. It's good to know those things too, because then we can stay grounded and present and sort of calm through the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows, right? And, I'm Rahu moon. I have a lot of Rahu energy in my chart. Like, I can be very extreme. I have an 8th house moon. I'm like, everything is so intense. It's like, it's very like that for me. But I find that like Vedic astrology really changed the way that I view everything and the way that I view reality, in the sense that it shows you that like everything is always shifting. If I had a Vedic astrologer tell me about Sati Sati before I went through Sati Sati, let me tell you, it would have been a very different experience. Like, I was pretty young. I think I started my Sati Sati, it would be about 6-7 years ago. I think I had like just turned 2021 when I started my Sati Sati. And I'm actually coming out of my Sati Sati. The final phase is going to be 2025, and I am so excited. I'm going to throw a party the day that I officially leave Sati Sati. But if someone told me at that age, like, hey, you're going to go through this really intense transit in astrology, here's how to work with it, here's how to use the energy, here's how to honor Saturn, here's how to work with this energy, things would have gone vastly different for me at that time, okay? But I had to learn the hard way because that's what, I had to experience to become like an astrologer essentially. But I had no reference point for Sati Sati at all. So I was in New York struggling so much when I went through my Sati Sati. It was really crazy. Like, I was hit by just so many things at once, and it felt really just like so tough to navigate without any sort of counsel or guidance of a Vedic astrologer. Because going through Sati Sati sort of, blindly essentially is really intense, trust me. So it's really good to know when you are going to hit Sati Sati time periods. But it's just the knowledge is the power, right? Knowledge is power, and it's also so healing and so freeing to know that, like, hey, this is what you're experiencing, and getting that validation of your experience, then also knowing here's when it's going to change, here's when it's going to lighten up, here's when it's going to ease up through the Vedic astrology dashas or transits as well too. Like, the sort of profound acceptance you can get in that is so good, because something that I've found is like a lot of quote unquote new age spirituality, which, by the way, if I ever see the word new age spirituality, I know that it's like something that I want to stay away from, because there's nothing new age about spirituality. It's the most ancient thing we have. So if someone is like using quote unquote new age practices, it's like, what are they actually practicing? I don't know. But, an issue that I have with a lot of modern spiritual practices is there's this sense of like, you can manifest anything, you can think of anything, you can this, and if you don't manifest it, it's because your mind and blah, 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 and this and that. And it's like, that is not, first of all, that's not real. Like, there's no version of reality where every single thought you have is going to manifest every single thing, every intention. That is absolutely just insane. But the other aspect of that is like, if you are hit by Saturn through and through in your chart, you are not going to be able to manifest all the things you want. You're going to have to go through some tough Saturn lessons. Like, that is reality, right? If you are being hit by, a bunch of Jupiter energy, yeah, you probably can actually manifest a lot of amazing things, and you can be blessed, and you can be lucky, and you can travel, and you can go to ashrams, and you can, hang out with gurus, right? That's when the Jupiter energy is there. If you're going through really intense 7th house transits, K2's in your 7th, Saturn's aspecting K2 in your 7th, yeah, your relationships, business partnerships can be very tested, and that's just the way it is, right? And I feel like having that acceptance and understanding of what you're going through and how to work with the energy is so much more powerful than, trying to constantly change or force or think positive or this or that. It's like, acceptance is what actually is the most healing thing. And to understand like what you're going through astrologically and working with it and not trying to go against it, right? When someone is going through a lot of Saturn energy in their chart, it is not a time for them to be lazy and overindulgent and, not respect their elders, right? It's like, if you're going through a heavy Saturn energy, like, do all the things that Saturn would want you to do, right? If you're going through lots of Moshka energy, Jupiter in your 12th, which is a transit I'm going through right now, you want to meditate, you want to, tap into Moshka, you want to go towards what the astrology is sort of asking you to do and guiding you towards, right? And it's really, really important to know that everything is some sort of, karmic experience for our growth and for our evolution in this lifetime as well, too, because nothing, life wouldn't be fun or interesting if it was always so one way, right? The fun of life is like, okay, we go through this and we learn through this and we grow through this and we expand through this and we change through this, and it goes on, right? Life isn't exciting or interesting or fun if we lived the same experience every day, if things were always good or always bad, right? It's like that duality is what makes life interesting, right? Because it's like we never really know what's coming. I mean, through astrology we do. But we kind of, have to go through these experiences to learn. And that's why we're here on this earth. Like, we're not put on this earth to not learn our karmic lessons, to not experience soul growth, right? Why would we be here? Like, why would we reincarnate to just do the same thing over and over again? That's not why we're here. We're here to learn the lessons and unravel the karma and do the growth and do the work, right? And through astrology, you'll start to understand why at certain points you are going through certain experiences. All right. So it's why it's so important to not get too high, too low, too overjoyous and excited when things are going well and thinking that it's never going to come down again. But also important to know that when you are going through rougher transits, dasha periods, it is going to go up again as well too. Trust me, as someone who has been through a Rahu dasha most of my life, Sati Sati, I mean, I just like, there was points in my Rahu Saturn dasha where I was like, I don't think it's ever going to get better. Like, I thought it was never going to get better because Rahu with Saturn dasha was god awful. It was god awful. And I was so young and I didn't understand Vedic astrology transits yet. And it was just like, honestly, the worst. But if I looked to like 3 to 4 years ahead of that, everything changed so much, so much, right? And, you know, I haven't even been through my Jupiter dasha. Like, as a Vedic astrologer, I haven't even gone through my best dasha yet. So, you know, life is just so cyclical in that way where it's like there's so much to look forward to and there's so much that's always shifting and always changing, and life is exciting in that sense that it's always going to be changing, right? You could walk out your door tomorrow and have some crazy experience, some crazy, you know, meeting of a person, some crazy whatever, and, you know, you want to wait for those experiences and not think that things are always going to be the same. Okay? So that's truly the power of Vedic astrology, and I've been through all sorts of crazy transits and dasha time periods and, you know, still coming out of my Sati Sati. So if there's one thing I know, it is rough transits and rough dasha sequences. So I fully understand from personal experience. And there's so much beauty in knowing that like things get better. It always gets better, right? For me, like from a very truthful perspective, like probably 2019 to 2020 was the first time I started getting some really good astrology in my transits and in my chart and my dasha sequence. Like that was the first time in a very long period where things were finally like going right and things were going well and things were picking up and I was tapping into like my soul purpose and I was like aligning with my true self. And so many amazing things happened in that window of time for me. And like 3 years before that was also like the worst time, right? So it's always cyclical. It's always shifting. It's always changing. And, you know, the place that I'm at now as a Vedic astrologer is like I try to keep things grounded and sort of even kiltered and not get too excited and over this, but also not ever getting pessimistic or overly negative when things can feel, you know, maybe more blocked or intense in some regard as well too. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of philosophical musing. I feel like my Jupiter in Sagittarius Hamsa Yoga is fully coming out in this video. I am Jupiter through and through. All right, I hope that you guys have such a beautiful, blessed day or night whenever you're watching this, and I really wanted to make this video to explain why astrology is so important, why Vedic astrology is so important. It's not about your personality, it's not about your psychology. Can we unravel that in the chart? Yes, but what I find to be the true essence and the power of astrology is knowing the seasons and the cycles of things and how things are always shifting, things are always moving, things are always going to get better, and the hopefulness that comes from that, but not like a false sense of hope, right? Like it truly does always shift with astrology. I've seen it time and time again. All right, so sending all the love, and we'll talk soon.